Well, it seems like a long time ago, and yet not so long ago. When I was a child of 9 years of age in eastern Canada, have you all heard of Prince Edward Island? How many of you have heard of that little island? Not very many. Well, it's the smallest of the 10 provinces of Canada. Most of the other provinces of Canada are all larger than Texas. Prince Edward Island is only 135 miles long and 1 mile wide at the narrowest, and it's shaped like a bow tie. And that's where the nation of Canada was confederated back in 1850. That's also where the Anne of Green Gables stories originated. How many of you, if you haven't heard of Prince Edward Island, you know about Anne of Green Gables? And as a child, I attended a one-room country school, just like Anne and Gilbert and Diane. Probably had a crush on a girl like Anne. I hope I didn't put her pigtails in the inkwell, like Gilbert did with Anne's pigtails. But at 9 years of age, I had a problem. We lived on a farm, and all the visitors who came on Sunday to dinner saw me, the oldest of the 4 Richardson boys, being seen and not heard, as children were in those days. But they would ask me the same question, inevitably. The question was, how old are you? I'd say, 9 years old, sir. 9 years old, what are you going to be when you grow up, lad? I don't know. Oh, you got to think about these things, lad. You're 9 years old. So after this question had been asked again and again and again by adults, I began to think, apparently I'm supposed to know. So I better try to find out. So I remember one Sunday at dinner, a guest asked me the same question. I gave the same answer. All the rest of the afternoon, I was thinking, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I thought of this and I thought of that. Didn't particularly want to be a farmer. I wanted something else. So when I realized I just couldn't make up my mind, after dinner, I climbed the wooden hill. Can any of you guess what that means, to climb the wooden hill? Go upstairs to bed. Why not? It's one of those Prince Edward Islandisms, I guess. So I climbed the wooden hill. It was a summer evening. And I looked out the bedroom window. It was open. Looked up at the stars, and I remembered, I knew about God. When I was 5 years old, the doctor warned my father, your son is very sick from pneumonia. I hope you have other children at home, because I'm not sure you're going to take Don home from this hospital bed. So my father was very concerned. He came into the hospital room. I was in an oxygen tent. And he told me about God and told me about prayer. And he said, I am praying that God will make you well. But I want you to pray and ask God to make you well. We almost never went to church. I was baptized as a child in the Anglican church, yes, but didn't seem to have much carryover. The water evaporated it. But I prayed. I said, yes, okay, Dad, I will pray. And I did. Please, God, please make me well. And I was forming a concept in my mind of an infinite being whom you could not see, but who could see you, and who could hear your request. And I got well. So here I am at 9 years of age, 4 years later, and so I decided I needed help from God again. So I knelt down by the bedroom window, looked up at the stars and said, hey God, it's me again. Donnie, remember I was sick? I asked you to make me well, and you did. That was really kind of you. I appreciate it, but I got another problem. Adults keep asking me what I'm going to be when I grow up, and I don't know how to answer them, and I'm tired of saying I don't know. So would you please help me find out what I should be when I grow up? I'll sure appreciate it. And then I said, and I hope it's something really interesting. And I remember feeling a peace, a presence there. I knew he heard me, and I knew I would get my answer in due time. So from then on, whenever adults asked me that pesky question, instead of saying I don't know, I'd look him in the eye and say, I don't know yet. But I knew I was going to find out. Fast forward, I was 17, and a Christian whom I met, by this time we'd moved all the way across Canada to Victoria, British Columbia, on the west coast, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And I met a Christian. I wanted to go mountain climbing, and he did too. Well, I took along my pack with all my supplies and sleeping bag. He brought along his pack with supplies and sleeping bag and the knowledge of God in his heart. And he talked to me about the Lord. He talked about Jesus as a personal friend. And I was drawn to him. And he took me to Youth for Christ meetings. And I sure loved the singing. But there was a problem. My father, who had died by then, when the Second World War broke out, my dad didn't wait to be drafted into the Canadian Army. Something had to be done about this Hitler nonsense over there in Europe before it spread any further. So he volunteered. And when you volunteer, you go in as a buck private. But within a few weeks, they recognized his leadership abilities and they elevated him to the rank of Sergeant Major, which is as high as an enlisted man can go. So he was in charge of training Canadian soldiers for the D-Day crossing. And would have gone over with the Canadians, but just a couple of months before D-Day, he fell sick and was diagnosed by the military doctors with Hodgkin's disease. So they said, we're going to get you honorably discharged. You need to go back home to Canada and make arrangements for your family because you've only got 2 years to live. Hodgkin's was incurable then, now it can often be arrested. And he did live 2 years, but during that 2 years he moved us across to the west coast of Canada. And it was God's providence because there was a lot more gospel witness there than I remember even hearing about in Prince Edward Island at the time. For 3 years, Jim was a faithful witness to me, but the thing that kept me from becoming totally evangelical as he was the fact that my father, even though he taught me to pray, had never said anything about being born again and giving your heart to Jesus. And I thought that this evangelical gospel business was really something for me. My father would have said something about it. When he died, I committed myself to live by the things he taught me, and this was not part of it. So this is what kept me from being coming through as to the Lord, as Jim, my friend, would have said. He was about to give up on me. Said, Lord, I'm not getting through to Don. I don't understand the problem, but please find someone else who'll be a more effective witness to him because he seems to be so close and yet doesn't quite come through. But he invited me to one more Youth for Christ meeting. And that evening, a man named Percy Wills was preaching the gospel. I didn't see him until he was introduced. He stood up, and I was transfixed because from a distance, Percy Wills looked almost exactly like my father. And here was a man who so resembled my father preaching the gospel to me. I said, a man who looks that much like my dad must be a really good guy, must know what he's talking about. So I listened. And God used his mere resemblance to my father, to whom I was so devoted and committed, to open the doors for me. And I knew it was as if my father was saying through him, Don, I didn't say anything about this while I was alive, but I'm letting you know through this man, it is good, it is true. Believe in Jesus Christ, you will not be disloyal to me. And so I prayed. And I knew I'd passed from death unto life. The joy of the Lord was overflowing within me. And when we prayed, I thought every head was supposed to be bowed and every eye closed, but apparently that didn't include the ushers, who were also trained as counselors. Next thing I knew, a kind Salvation Army man had his arm over my shoulder and saying, son, would you come with me to the prayer room? I knew I didn't need to go to the prayer room But he thought I did. And if I said, no, sir, I don't want to go to the prayer room, he might feel kind of offended. And God had just forgiven me for everything. How could I offend someone when I'd been forgiven? So I said, yes, sir. And I went with him down to the prayer room. And we sat down there, and he opened his Bible and began asking me questions. And his questions were interrupting my fellowship with the Lord. He was going through the 4 spiritual laws or something like that. So I prayed another prayer. And I said, Lord, this man is interrupting my fellowship with you. I don't want to answer his questions. I just want to think about you and be grateful to you, because now I really know you. How can I make him be quiet without hurting his feelings? Immediately, God gave me the answer. Ask him to pray for you. Oh, yes, that won't hurt his feelings. So I said, sir, would you please pray for me? How could he refuse a request like that from someone he thought was a poor benighted sinner? Which I had been and would still be in some ways, but I was redeemed. So he began praying for me, and that suited me just fine. Well, Jim, and the only reason I went there that night, because I'd run in a track meet that afternoon, it was a Saturday, and I thought after running the 800 meters and the 1600 meters flat out, I'm going to be pretty tired. I'll probably just go to bed early. But I just felt after I had a shower and a meal, I was rejuvenated and wanted to go to that meeting. And Jim had played his guitar and mouth organ at the same time. It amazed me how anybody could play 2 musical instruments at the same time. But he came down, and we were brothers in the Lord at last. 2 weeks later, I was invited to a summer camp meeting at a Pentecostal campground. I had been raised Anglican. I didn't even know about Pentecostals and their different way of worship. And the speaker, I had to hitchhike 100 kilometers to get there. And those were the days when people still had enough mutual confidence in public morality that they would pick up a hitchhiker. Nowadays it's kind of rare. So I was there, and the speaker was a missionary from somewhere in Africa, and he kept saying, the greatest privilege any Christian can have is to be called of God, to proclaim the gospel somewhere in the world where the name of Jesus is unknown, where the church does not exist, to be the one who enables the kingdom of God to cross a new frontier and transform the lives of people through God's grace. I listened to him and I thought, yes, that must be the truth. And suddenly, guess what I remembered praying? That prayer. 8 years before, at 9 years of age, I remembered praying that prayer. And suddenly the presence of God was there, and he said, Don, I heard you. I've waited until now to give you my answer. First, I had to draw you to put your faith in my Son. Now I'm telling you through this man that what he's talking about is my answer. This is what you are born to be and do, and reborn to be and do. Will you do this for me? And I said, yes, I will. It was settled on the spot. I was not just willing to go, I was planning on going. It was a question of when and where. And at 17 years of age, I was really interested in girls. And I thought, there's probably not very many pretty girls willing to go to a faraway wild frontier like I'm probably going to someday. So maybe I'll never get married. Maybe I'll have to marry someone I don't really feel attracted to. Perhaps that's part of the cost of being a missionary, the price of discipleship. But I decided to pray another prayer, and guess what I prayed that time? Lord, if somewhere in the world there is a young woman who loves you at least as much as I do, and is willing to serve you anywhere on earth that you would call us to go, and if you know that we're right for each other, please triangulate us together. Cause us to meet somewhere sometime and recognize each other and fall in love and get married. And if she could be really pretty, that would be nice too. And God heard that prayer. Her name was Carol, and she was at that time in Oklahoma. Her father was a pastor. She was called to missionary service from 10 years of age. And her parents decided to take her all the way up to Prairie Bible Institute in Alberta, Canada, because they'd heard that was a good school for missionary training, and I'd heard the same thing, and I was there. We were in the same class, but there was no dating in that school. Strict rules. They even had rules like the girls went shopping downtown Three Hills, not much of a downtown, but such as it was, on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and the guys went on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. They even had 2 libraries. There was a joke that they had pink and blue sidewalks, but actually they didn't. And there was even a joke that a girl got expelled for having a hole in the knee of her bathing suit. But actually, I knew about the rules, and I went there in spite of the rules. I knew I needed to learn discipline to be a servant of God. And all of us there, we just accepted the rules. And it was like, it's not like all Christians are supposed to live by these rules at all times, but if you're a Marine and you're in boot camp, you live by a certain set of rules that are special to boot camp, that are going to prepare you for whatever you're going to face as a Marine subsequently. So that was the whole purpose, and it was great. But once you got to be a junior, if you felt that someone was sort of returning your smiles when you met on the sidewalks or wherever in the dining hall, then you could ask for permission to meet. And I thought that Carol from Oklahoma had a nice, sweet Southern accent, and she was pretty, and it was pretty clear she loved the Lord. So I asked for permission to meet with her. And the principal, L.E. Maxwell, said, "Are you applying to a mission, Don Richardson?" I said, "Yes." "Which one?" "Regions Beyond Missionary Union." "Oh, yes, Ebenezer Vine's mission. If he recommends it, I'll grant permission." So I said, "Thank you, sir." Walked to get my mail. Here was a letter from Ebenezer Vine, General Secretary of the Regions Beyond Missionary Union down in Philadelphia. And I told him of my interest in Carol. And so he said, "Please ask Mr. Maxwell for permission to meet her." I'd just come out of his office. I walked back, knocked on the door, and said, "Mr. Maxwell, I've just received this letter from Ebenezer Vine." He read it and said, "All right, write a letter asking her if she wants to meet with you. Give it to the Dean of Men. He'll give it to the Dean of Women. The Dean of Women will give it to her." You guys here at Faith Bible College, you don't do it that way? Whoa, you students are going to be saying, "Why did they invite Don Richardson to this campus?" Planted ideas like that in our principal's head. Well, I wrote the letter, rewrote it, handwriting had to be perfect, gave it to the Dean of Men, he gave it to the Dean of Women, Carol got it, and I thought, what is her answer going to be? For all I know, she may be about to get engaged to somebody back in Oklahoma. But no, she said yes. So we met in the Dean of Men's living room on a Sunday afternoon, and it was so romantic. She was so pretty. And I was in love with her, and she seemed to be really interested. And of course, I wanted to get married right after graduation. Go out to the mission field with Regions Beyond Missionary Union. She said, "God has called me to take 3 years of nurses training before I go." 3 years of nurses training? I've already been in love with you for 2 years. Now I got to wait another 3 years. Who am I, Jacob? And the mission recommended that I get some experience in pastoring, and I did. I pastored a church and did youth work in my hometown. And some of Carol's friends were saying, "He won't wait 3 years. He's a guy. He's a Christian, but he's still a guy. They get impatient. He'll find someone else." And she said, "If it's God's will for me, he will wait." And I did. So we were married after we were both accepted by Regions Beyond Missionary Union, which is now called World Team. Please everyone say out loud, World Team. Now say worldteam.org. Look us up. We're the second oldest interdenominational faith mission that is still going strong, still adhering to its original goals of crossing new frontiers, planting churches in areas of the world in the midst of cultures where the church does not exist. Began in 1873 and still going. All right, so after 15 years service among tribal people in the western half of the island of New Guinea, which is now called Papua, used to be called Dutch New Guinea. That's what it was when we arrived there in 1962. Then the Dutch handed it over to Indonesia, and they called it Irian Jaya. And now they've changed the name to Papua, which is confusing because people hear you say Papua, they think it's short for Papua New Guinea. It isn't. Papua New Guinea is an independent nation, the eastern half of the island. Papua is a province of Indonesia, the western half of the same island. And you'll see it on the map there. It's shaped like a dinosaur. The head of the dinosaur is at the western end, a narrow neck, a huge hulking body, a tail several hundred kilometers long. It's 2,500 kilometers long, and it's the home of 1,000 tribes speaking 1,000 languages. So Carol and I arrived there in 1962 and began our ministry, a newly discovered tribe in the swamps in the southern part of the island, right down in the belly of the dinosaur, so to speak. We're called the Sawi. They were known to be still practicing both cannibalism and headhunting, and that is very rare. Cannibals tend not to be headhunters. Headhunters tend to be satisfied not to be cannibals as well. But there's about 6 tribes in the world, and only 6 tribes that practice both, and the Sawi were one of them. Would they welcome us? I had to find out, because God was speaking to my heart saying, I want you to go to the Sawi people. They're the people I prepared for you to bear witness for me. And I know they're cannibals. I know they're headhunters. Don't worry about that. I've taken care of everything. They'll welcome you. It was as if God was saying, I have a ministry match made in heaven waiting for you, but you have to go among them to find it. I said, Lord, I hear you speaking reassuringly to my heart about going to that tribe. But my wife, Carol, is a pastor's daughter at that time from Cincinnati, Ohio. She's been on a camping trip or 2. Can I expect her to go with me into the midst of potential danger like that with a baby, little Stephen, our firstborn son, less than a year old? But God gave her his own personal assurance. So we said, we want to go to that Sawi tribe. And we did. And I'll talk more about that later, even though I guess some of you may have read Peace Child. Have you seen the DVD called Peace Child? In which 1,000 actual Sawi men, women, and children reenact the main elements of the Peace Child. How many of you have seen the DVD? Just a half dozen people? Well, we have some copies of it back there. We might maybe tomorrow show it to you. But as I found the Peace Child analogy among the Sawi and later found in other tribes in New Guinea, there were other analogies, foreshadowings of Jesus. A Sawi father gave a son to a father in the enemy village. And if he was willing to make a sacrifice that great, he was demonstrating a commitment that everyone knew an insincere man could not summon the resolve for. No insincere man could make a sacrifice that great. His will would fall short of the mark. But if a man was deeply sincere, genuinely wanted peace, and could bring himself to give up a son for that purpose, that was a sacrifice that would be a basis for mutual trust among a people who otherwise always suspected treachery. In fact, they honored masters of treachery as Tareduans, heroes. But that would be a means whereby people could lay aside their fear of treachery, because once a sacrifice as great as that had been made, no one would be so evil as to renew hostilities afterwards, thus invalidating so great a sacrifice. And always the father in living Sawi memory who had given a child as a peace child was a father blessed with several children and gave one. But the Sawi In living memory, I'd never heard of a father giving an only child, but that's what happened. When I urged them to bring an ongoing war to an end, a father blessed with only one child asked the other fathers in his village who were blessed with several children, will you give one as a peace child? Lest the Tuan, that's what they called me, and the Nyonya, my wife, would move away to another part of the tribe because of the violence that was rampant there. They lacked the resolve. He said, then I will do it. He gave an only son. And the peace was made. I mean, even the Sawi were awestruck at a sacrifice as great as the one Kayo made that day. January 7th, 1963. And I said, what is this? A father giving a son, an only son, to his enemies for the purpose of reconciliation? Why is there something familiar about this? And then it struck me. I'd been praying, Lord, I need a gift of wisdom here. You all know what the Bible says, if any man lack wisdom, let him take a further course in seminary. What does it say one must do? First and foremost, ask of God. And as we all know, God will often lead the asker to study somewhere in an excellent school like this one. But I was asking directly from God, and it would have to be an answer directly from Him. There was no one else there to give counsel. And I saw God's answer. So I proclaimed Jesus in all the villages of the Sawi tribe, 18 different villages, almost 3,000 cannibal headhunters, that God, the Greater Father, had provided the Tarab Tim Kodon, the greatest possible peace child, to establish the Torkon Kodon, the greatest possible peace between God and man and his fellow man. Until that time, they thought that Judas was the figure in the gospel story that they admired most. Why? He used a kiss as a means of treachery. They said, he's done us one better. We never thought of kissing our victims at the moment of truth. Tell us more about Judas, they begged. He's the sort of man any one of us would be proud to promise a daughter to in marriage. But when they learned that the one Judas betrayed with that kiss was a peace child, they said, oh, you didn't tell us that. Oh, that's the most evil thing anyone could possibly do. Judas's ratings slipped. Jesus was unveiled as the perfect personal fulfiller of their own uniquely Sawi peace child custom. So then I thought, if there's something like this in Sawi culture, and I found out in China, missionaries found in the Chinese language, the writing system that the ancestors of the Chinese chose 40 centuries ago. It's not a phonetic alphabet of 26 or so symbols like our A to Z. They use a pictographic writing system. And the way those little pictures get combined has some spiritual messages encoded. The Chinese word for righteous requires you to draw the symbol for a sacrificial lamb above the first person singular pronoun. I under the lamb, righteous. The same metaphor that John the Baptist used to introduce Jesus among the Jewish people was there. And there's 120 Chinese words that can be decoded that way, tying in with things in Scripture. The word for a ship is a ship with 8 people sailing in it. Why 8 people? How many people were delivered from the flood in a ship? 8 people. They apparently knew that. The word for covet requires you to draw 2 trees and a woman standing between the 2 trees making a choice. What could that have to do with coveting? It goes on and on. So this is one reason why there's such a great response to the gospel in China. The Chinese people have a sense that somehow God was sovereignly giving their own ancestors an anticipation, a foreshadowing of the message that would one day be brought to their nation. In India, where Hinduism prevails, there's a belief that somewhere in the world there's an upside-down tree. What can cause a tree to be upside down besides a tornado, hurricane, a bulldozer? This is a tree that is upside down because it is rooted in heaven, and it grows down toward the earth instead of up from the earth. The upside down tree spreads its branches out above the earth, in every possible direction, yielding fruit for all mankind. It goes on to say, the trunk of the upside-down tree will be gashed, and the sap that bleeds from the wound in the side of the upside-down tree is for the healing of mankind. Nourishing fruit from the branches, healing sap from a wound in the side. Very strange metaphor. In spite of its strangeness, does it remind you of someone you know and love? So it goes around the world, and I teach about these things. I call them redemptive analogies. Other times I refer to them as cultural compasses, just as physical compasses point to only one place, magnetic north. Cultural compasses point to only one person, Jesus. And these are some examples. But God has called me to a second life message, like it's like a twin-track life message, the cultural dynamics of missions in terms of discovering redemptive analogies that serve as eye-openers, that become heart openers for the reception of the gospel message. The other side is the biblical basis of missions, because a lot of Christians do not have a very clear understanding of what the Bible really says about the necessity of an all-out worldwide cross-cultural mission of mercy to all the nations, tribes, and peoples of the world. You ask the average Christian, what does the Bible say about missions? They'll quote something from Matthew 28, maybe Acts 1:8, something from Romans 10, and 2 or 3 other verses. 5 or 6 verses out of 32,000? Really? Apparently it's not a strong emphasis. So a lot of Christians get the idea that missions is a little side issue out by the right field foul line. Not until the last 3 minutes of his 3 years of public teaching did Jesus say to his disciples, oh, by the way, men, there's just one more thing. When you hear what it is, you're going to wish you could sit down with me for the next few months and discuss the feasibility of carrying it out, why it's necessary. But please understand, I only had 3 years, and I had so many more important things to teach you. Time has gotten away, but here is this last command. Go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Good, you got that? Bye-bye. I'm on my way into my air-conditioned heaven. If it happened like that, don't you think it would be rather unfair to clobber the disciples cold turkey with the Great Commission in the last 3 minutes of 3 years and then vanish into the sky, leaving them there staggered? What was that he said? How we about to... Yeah. They would have been absolutely flummoxed. It really didn't happen that way, but a lot of Christians think it did. So, because of the lack of understanding of how pervasive is God's expression of his concern for all peoples, all nations, throughout the Old Testament as well as the New, millions of Christians have been left with the impression missions is probably something God invented just to keep hyperactive believers occupied and out of everyone else's hair. It's only for those who are zealous, yes, but otherwise not qualified to be good pastors or seminary professors here at home. Shoo them off to faraway nations where people are perhaps less sophisticated and may not notice their shortcomings, as we do. Others will say, no, missions is only for Christians who are so holy they can read at night without bed lamps. The light of their halos suffices. But once you understand that missions begins in the Old Testament, pervades Old Testament scripture, and follows through faithfully as a major theme in the New Testament, then your perspective is transformed. And God has given me the desire and the joy of researching and teaching the biblical basis of missions. And some of you have heard parts of it, I guess, through the Kairos course or the Perspectives course, or through John Rush, I guess, has taught you students some things. But I'd like to begin teaching the biblical basis of missions in Luke chapter 24. Because in Luke chapter 24, we find that the disciples were very disappointed by the crucifixion, discouraged by the fact that Jesus, whom they thought was going to be Israel's political deliverer, Jesus, who had manifested awesome supernatural power again and again, did not exploit his ability to do things supernaturally in his own self-defense. He allowed his enemies to arrest him, put him on a false trial, crown him with thorns, lash him with whips, insult him, and then crucify him. And they did not see how this could possibly be the right thing, because the disciples had grown up as Jewish youth in Galilee, and they would have attended synagogue schools in Galilee during their youth. Each of them, after his bar mitzvah, would have graduated to attending adult synagogue meetings, and they would have heard probably dozens of rabbis over the years give expositions, commentaries on Old Testament scripture, and a lot of what the rabbis taught in the Jewish synagogues had to do with the Messiah. And what did the rabbis emphasize would be the primary job description of the Messiah? He would come to be a political emancipator, delivering Israel from the oppression of Rome. And he would probably even mobilize a 1,000,000-man Jewish army and march against Rome, destroy Rome, make Jerusalem the capital city of the world, and guarantee peace, well-being, prosperity for God's chosen people, the Jews, world without end. Hallelujah, amen. So that is what the Jewish people expected, and that is what Jesus' disciples thought was the goal. And so they were thinking, all this miracle working and teaching is wonderful, but when are we going to turn a corner? When is Jesus going to show some political savvy? When is he going to go down to Jerusalem to persuade the Jewish leaders that he is the one who is going to bring about the deliverance of Israel from Roman oppression? It just didn't happen. And instead of this, there was the crucifixion. I came face to face with that Jewish view of the job description for the Messiah when my wife Carol, who's with the Lord, my second wife is also named Carol. She's here with me on this journey by your kindness in saying, bring Carol with you, and paying the extra ticket for her, and we're very grateful for that. She's my partner in ministry now, has been for almost 4 years. And I prayed for another act of triangulation on God's part, and he answered again, and here she is with me. But after Carol and I came home from New Guinea in 1977 at the request of World Team, because by then Peace Child had been published and the Peace Child film was released, and the mission said, we're getting so many inquiries as to whether you're available to speak on seminary campuses, Bible college, chapels, and church missions conferences. We think you should spend the next few years of your life, Don, responding to these invitations, serve the cause of world missions from the home end, so that we and other missions will have more recruits, and the spread of the gospel would be facilitated even more by your staying home as a motivator, an educator, and a solicitor of mission colleagues than it would be if you went back to New Guinea to reach just one more tribe, translating New Testament into a second language out there. But they added, if you selfishly insist on going back out to New Guinea to reach just one more tribe yourself, I suppose we'll have to let you go. We felt the weight of their logic bearing down upon us, and Carol and I agreed to stay home, respond to the invitations that were there. And so from 1977 until now, that's what I've been doing internationally as well as domestically in the US and Canada. But when we moved to a predominantly Jewish part of greater Los Angeles called Woodland Hills. We were amazed to find 70% of our neighbors are Jewish. So Carol and I began praying, Lord, you gave us wisdom to share the gospel of Jesus as a peace child with our Sawi friends in the jungles of New Guinea. But this predominantly Jewish part of the San Fernando Valley of greater Los Angeles is a different challenge. We're asking you for a fresh, new gift of wisdom to be able to share the gospel with our Jewish neighbors. An opportunity to put that wisdom to work. Not long after we began praying that way, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door and there stood a rabbi. Black suit, black hat, black briefcase, black shoes, black beard, and a cheery smile. He said, you advertised such and such a thing for sale? I said, yes, I did. He said, is it still available? I said, it is. He said, I'm interested. I may want to purchase it. May I come in and see it? Here's my card. I'm a rabbi. So I said, yes, Rabbi, come in. While I was showing him the thing I was offering for sale, he glanced down on the coffee table and saw a copy of a book I wrote called Eternity in Their Hearts lying there. He picked it up and read the title, Eternity in Their Hearts, by Don Richardson. Why, that's you. You wrote this. Yes, Rabbi, I wrote it. He said, Eternity in Their Hearts. It sounds religious. Is it New Age? I said, no, Rabbi. I wrote that book from a conservative Christian point of view. Immediately he frowned, and I thought, uh-oh, have I just cut off all further communication with this interesting man? By telling him I'm a conservative Christian, maybe I've cost myself a sale as well. Next thing I knew, I actually heard him say, still speaking out from under that frown, Don Richardson, perhaps you can help me. I said, Rabbi, please tell me, how may I help you? He said, Don, I've been leading a Wednesday evening discussion group to help the people in my temple understand differences between Christianity and Judaism. I've been inviting a priest of a certain denomination to come in Wednesday by Wednesday so that when I, as a Jewish rabbi, explain one of our Jewish distinctives, I can call upon that priest to explain to us how Christians differ, if in fact they do. But he said, Don, it has not been working the way I hoped it would, because no matter what I say as a rabbi, I cannot get that priest to disagree with me. Everything I say, we Jews believe, he says, we believe that too. We believe that too. We believe that too. So we're not learning about differences between Christianity and Judaism. And that's the whole point of the course. Nor will we learn about such differences unless somewhere I can find a Christian who is willing to state Christian distinctives clearly and without apology. Something tells me, you may be that kind of a Christian, you conservative Christian, you. I said, Rabbi, I trust you're right about that. He said, Don, the priest called me this morning to say he has to cancel for this coming Wednesday evening. I'm looking for someone to take his place. Are you available Wednesday evening, willing to take the man's place? I said, yes, Rabbi, yes. Oh, good, he said. Here's a map. Here's where you can find the temple. Be there at 7:30. I'll introduce you to the class, and you and I will interact on differences between Christianity and Judaism from 7 to 9, 7 o'clock. So I showed up Wednesday evening, was introduced to a class of about 30 Jewish men and women, some of them leaders in the Hollywood television movie industry. And the rabbi and I began interacting. Oh, believe me, I'd been praying that God would use me among them. My first ever in-depth interaction with Jewish people on their turf by their invitation. I was thanking God for the privilege. A few minutes into the evening, responding to something the rabbi had said, I used the word salvation. I was quoting Isaiah 49, verse 6, a verse that shows what the Messiah's job description was supposed to be. It is too small a thing for you to restore the tribes of Jacob. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. The rabbi heard the word salvation. He said, oh, Don, give me a moment, please. You've just made me realize the word salvation has a very different meaning for Jews and Christians. I must explain. So he said to the class, Don, speaking as a Christian, used the word salvation. I want you all to understand, when a Christian speaks of salvation, invariably a Christian means salvation in the sense of salvation from sin. But when we Jews use that word, it has a different meaning. The meaning that that word has for us in our Jewish scriptures is not salvation in the sense of salvation from sin, but salvation in the sense of political deliverance, social emancipation. That is what salvation has always meant to us Jews. Christians later changed the meaning of salvation for their purposes to salvation from sin. And that remains to this day a major difference between Christianity and Judaism. Thank you, Don. He said I had to clarify that point. Now please continue with what you were saying. I said, I see, Rabbi. That, of course, would explain why King David, when he was repenting of his sin with Bathsheba, wrote in Psalm 51, "Restore unto me the joy of your political deliverance." That jolted the rabbi. He said, yes, that is one place where it means salvation from sin in our scriptures, but I still maintain the primary meaning of salvation is in the sense of political deliverance, social emancipation. What was I encountering that evening? And by the way, he invited me back for a second Wednesday evening. By then, he was glad that was the last Wednesday evening of the course because his people were getting things, seeing things from much more of a Christian perspective, and he was not able to refute what I was saying. So he said, that's the last time of the course. Thank you, that's enough. But he was curious. He kept inviting me to have a meal with him, meet with him for lunch. He wanted to ask me more questions. And I began to get the impression he was leaning more and more in the direction of acknowledging Jesus as his Messiah. Then they moved him away from Los Angeles to New Jersey, and I lost contact with him. But pray for him. His first name is Aaron, Rabbi Aaron. Well, I hope I'll see him in heaven, because I think he got enough information to understand that it really is salvation from sin as the primary purpose of the Messiah. Bring God's salvation to the ends of the earth. Well, Jesus' disciples were influenced by that same point of view 2,000 years ago. When Jesus drew alongside two disciples setting out to walk the 8 miles, 12 kilometers from Jerusalem to a village called Emmaus, he noticed they looked very sad. So Jesus, incognito, said, "Why are you so downcast?" And they said, "Are you a stranger in Jerusalem? You don't know about the things that have happened here these last few days?" Feigning ignorance, Jesus said, "What things?" They said, "It has to do with a man called Jesus of Nazareth, a man mighty in word and deed." And then they said this, I quote, "We had hoped," notice the past tense, "that he was the one who would redeem Israel." When those two disciples used the word redeem, were they thinking of redemption in a spiritual sense, redemption from sin, or redemption in a political sense? It was the latter. The one who would redeem Israel from Roman oppression. And that hope was dashed. Obviously, the crucifixion shattered that hope. And it didn't compute for them. They were very confused. Everything the Jewish rabbis had encouraged them to expect from Jesus, if he truly was the Messiah, was refuted by his allowing himself to be betrayed and crucified and taken down dead and buried. All Peter could think to do was go back fishing, and he didn't mean fishing for men. I ask you, if the Jesus' disciples had been left in that utterly depressed, confused, anguished state of mind, would Christianity exist today? I don't think so. So we know that something awesome must have happened after the crucifixion that transformed them from 12 utterly dejected, downcast, confused, hopeless men into apostles who were rejuvenated, inspired to reach out with a message. What could have inspired them? There are some people who call themselves Christians who do not believe in the resurrection of the Lord from the dead. They're at a loss, I think, to explain, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, who else was there to undergird the disciples, give them an explanation of everything that made sense so that they could launch out as apostles and set a world religion on its way to the ends of the earth? The Apostle Paul wasn't a Christian. No one else was there to enable him to make sense unless it was Jesus. Well, he rose from the dead. Yes, he did. And on the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, here's what happened. You all know that Jesus had been a teacher for 3 years. During that 3-year period, 3 years of his public ministry, Jesus taught by what I call his micro-teaching method. That is to say, he would explain one brief verse or one brief passage from somewhere in the Old Testament, explain its significance, and then another separate verse, just a verse here and a verse there and a verse here and a verse there. I call that his micro-teaching method. And here are some examples that you find in the Gospels. Jesus, for 3 years, taught from various isolated, separate Old Testament passages. He taught about Hosea chapter 6, verse 6, and Matthew 12, verse 7. Commented on Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, in Matthew 11, verse 10. Explained the significance of Isaiah chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, in Matthew 13, verses 13 to 15, and so it goes. Explaining a brief passage here, a brief passage there. Micro-teaching is the kind of teaching designed to give learners an understanding of details, worm's eye views of an important truth here and an important truth there. But now, during the 40 days between our Lord's resurrection from the dead and his ascension back to the Father, we find him using, as Luke chapter 24 clearly shows, what I call his macro-teaching method. A teaching method that is designed not to supply more worm's eye views of brief Old Testament passages, but an eagle's eye view of mega themes that run throughout the Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi. Very different teaching style. And he did it twice. And here is Luke's description of how he taught those 2 disciples during that 12-kilometer walk. And how long does it take you to walk 12 kilometers? Anyone here ever walked 12 kilometers? And time yourself? 3 hours maybe? Unless you're trying to set a personal record, like I did yesterday, climbing Mount Manganui, all the way to the top, and timing myself and seeing how fast I could get back down without slipping in the rainy steps. Here's how Jesus taught during perhaps 3 hours. Beginning with Moses, how much of the Old Testament is represented just by that name Moses? The first 5 books. The Pentateuch, and Jews call that the Torah. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets. He explained what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Is that another micro lesson about a brief passage, men and women? No. That's an Old Testament survey course taught by our Lord, Genesis to Malachi. So they didn't just travel from Jerusalem to Emmaus, they traveled also at the same time from Genesis to Malachi. Very different teaching style, isn't it, from what you find earlier? And what effect did Jesus' macro teaching have upon those 2 men? What did they comment to each other after finally they recognized who he was? And the moment they recognized him as Jesus, he vanished from their sight. What did they say? Did not our hearts burn within us? In other words, did not our hearts glow with awe within us as he opened to us the scriptures along the way? And that indicates that mega teaching of the Word of God has an even greater potential to inform the human intellect, stir the human emotions, and activate the human will than micro teaching does. But most Christians receive instruction in the Word of God by which of these 2 teaching methods, the micro or the macro? The micro tends to prevail. Yes. So, Jesus taught them from Genesis to Malachi, and they were filled with awe. They'd never heard a rabbi teach like that. Then later Jesus appeared in the midst of the larger group of the disciples, possibly in the same upper room where they had shared the first Lord's Supper together prior to his betrayal. And on that occasion, Jesus once again became a teacher. Luke tells us, Luke 24, verse 45. See if I quote it correctly. Then Jesus simply reviewed for the disciples everything they learned from the rabbis in the synagogue schools and synagogue meetings in Galilee in their earlier years. He also just reviewed for them all the micro-teaching he'd given them in the prior 3 years. It was a great big review session to make sure they really knew it all. Is that a quote or a misquote? Hypothetically, he could have just reviewed what he'd all previously taught to make sure, like the final test before he left them, ascended into heaven. That is not what Luke tells us. Instead, Luke says, then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures, even more than they'd had their minds opened through his micro-teaching previously. That lets us know that Jesus purposefully waited until the 40-day interval between his resurrection and his ascension to the Father to take his disciples beyond what he himself had taught them, and for sure far beyond what they'd ever heard a rabbi teach in any synagogue school or synagogue meeting. He opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures, not a verse or two or three, but the scriptures, Genesis to Malachi, an Old Testament survey course, probably the same one that he gave to the two disciples is repeated now for the larger group of them. And Luke goes on to let us know he opened their minds to understand not 36 themes in the Old Testament, not 24, not 12, but just two. Two, and I call them two mega themes. Please say two mega themes. And the fact that he didn't teach these two mega themes in the prior 3 years, but still the disciples knew them in spite of the fact they'd not been taught in the prior 3 years, is an evidence. When must they have learned them? From whom and when? From Jesus during the 40-day period, an evidence that he did rise from the dead. Because the rabbis didn't grasp these themes. The rabbis overlooked these themes. But the disciples knew them, and they didn't figure them out on their own. They just were interpreting the scriptures according to the rabbinic model, the rabbinic formula. But Jesus opened their minds to understand themes, and it had to happen during that 40-day period because the Gospels do not show it happening earlier. So, two mega themes, and if I can ever find Luke among the throngs in heaven, I want to say thank you, Luke. I want to say a personal thank you to you that you didn't just tell us that Jesus opened their minds to understand the scriptures and left us without any clues as to what it was in the scriptures he opened their minds to understand. You gave us those two sound bites, two brief summaries of what I call mega theme A and mega theme B. And here is Luke's brief summary of mega theme A, the first mega theme that Jesus shows his disciples, runs through the Old Testament pervasively. Here it is. The quote. Jesus said, "This is what is written. The Messiah will mobilize 1 million-man Jewish army and march against Rome and destroy Rome and make Jerusalem instead of Rome the capital city of the world, guarantee peace, well-being for God's chosen people, the Jews, world without end. Hallelujah. Amen." No. If he'd taught anything like that, he would not have been opening their minds at all. That would have only been endorsing what the rabbis favored as their theme. Here's what Luke tells us Jesus did. He said, "This is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day." So mega theme A was Old Testament prophecy about a suffering, dying, rising Messiah. And with his opening their minds to understand that theme, did the crucifixion suddenly make sense? Yes, it was no longer a strange oddity that wasn't supposed to happen. It was a fulfillment of all passages like these. When you were a child, did anyone ever give you a sheet of paper with some numbered dots and a pencil? What were you asked to do? Connect all those dots in the right numerical order. And when you did that, what emerged before your eyes? A picture that was invisible to you until those dots got connected. So Jesus began connecting a series of dots in the sense of Old Testament prophecies. And the more passages he quoted, the more the disciples had their minds open to see what they had not understood, what no rabbi had ever taught, prior to Jesus opening their minds. Here are some of the passages Jesus would have quoted. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where God said to the serpent, right after the fall of man, I will put enmity between your offspring and his. Is that a quote or a misquote? Is that a quote or a misquote? I'm testing you. How many of you think that's a quote? Raise your hands. How many of you think that's a misquote? Raise your hands. How many have no idea one way or the other? It is a misquote. God did not say to the serpent, I will put enmity between your seed and his, your seed and hers. That's an indication that the deliverer is going to have a human mother. No human father is anywhere in view to be credited for his presence on the earth. Now, what was the cultural pattern all through the Old Testament? Which parent gets credit for the offspring? Abraham is called the son of Terah. Hey, guess what? We don't even know the name of Abraham's mother. Isaac, even though we know the name of Isaac's mother is not called her son, he's called the son of Abraham. And Jacob is the son of Isaac, and Saul is the son of Kish, and David's the son of Jesse. That's the pattern running all through Old Testament Scripture, but not in Genesis 3:15. And by the way, I had breakfast with that same rabbi, Rabbi Aaron. He said, Don, what shall we talk about? I said, oh, thank you, Lord. He's letting me choose a topic of conversation. And I said, let's talk about Genesis 3:15, something I had not drawn anyone's attention to in the 2 Wednesday evenings earlier. He said, Genesis 3:15, wait, I have to see what that says in my Hebrew Bible. So he opened his Hebrew Bible, read it in Hebrew, translated it back into English. So glad my NIV was accurate. And then he said, what a curious verse. Why does it interest you? It was clear to me immediately that in his years of training to become a rabbi, no one had ever drawn his attention to that verse. He didn't know it was there. And generally, Jews do not really study the scriptures directly. They study commentaries instead. Whatever their commentaries do not commentate, they don't know. So it's relatively easy for us to surprise Jews with knowledge of Old Testament scripture and try to get them intrigued to see what's really there that their commentators didn't talk about. So he said, why does it interest you? And I said, Rabbi, it's a very important verse, and here's why. And so I said, does it say his seed? No. In spite of the fact that the cultural pattern was always to credit the male parent for the offspring, here there is no male parent to be credited. God is talking about someone who will have a human mother. And what is he going to do? He's going to crush the head of a Caesar, a Pharaoh, a political despot. The rabbi said, no. So he's going to crush the head of the serpent. Oh, I see, Rabbi. So apparently he's more concerned to bring us salvation from sin than political deliverance. He said, there you go again, I get the point. So I went on to say, although the serpent gets the worst of it, the serpent gets his head crushed. Does the serpent manage to inflict some pain on him? I said, yes, the serpent will strike his heel. So I said, Rabbi, by way of summary, we have someone promised who's going to crush the head of the serpent. He's going to have a human mother. No human male parent is anywhere in view. And in the process of crushing the serpent's head in order to provide salvation from sin, he himself will suffer in the process. Rabbi, what is your response to this curious verse, as you called it? He saw the implications. He said, I have to see what our Hebrew commentaries say on this verse. I said, fine, Rabbi, after our meal, let's walk to your office. I want you to open all your Hebrew commentaries on Genesis to see what they say about this verse. He said, yes, I want to find out too. So after the meal, we walked to his office. He had 3 Hebrew commentaries on Genesis. He opened all 3 of them to Genesis 3:15, closed 2 of them because they had no comment at all. The third one had a comment. He read it and he said, Don, please don't ask me to tell you what that guy said. I said, why not? Because he doesn't know what he's talking about. I said, Rabbi, we had a deal. I walked all those blocks from that restaurant to your office to find out what Hebrew commentaries say about Genesis 3:15, so I'm holding you to your promise. Tell me what he said. He said, oh, it's so embarrassing. He's way off track. I said, oh, come on, tell me. I'm glad I didn't say, I won't tell anyone. Or I couldn't be telling you. He said, okay. He says, Genesis 3:15 means that husbands and wives will always get along with each other. Anyone can see that's not what it's about. So he was surprised to be brought face to face with a verse that is so significant to us as Christians and absolutely a quandary to him as a Jew. And we had other conversations and things like that showed up, and I can only pray that, because Jews like to think of themselves as logical, right? They pride themselves in logic. So it gets rather difficult when you lay a lot of logic on them that points to Jesus. It's a quandary for them. So then, Genesis 3:15 and Genesis 22. In Genesis 22, God guided Abraham to take his only son Isaac, whom he loved, and go to the region of Moriah. Josephus and other Jewish writers let us know the region of Moriah is the site of the city of Jerusalem. So Abraham, coming from Hebron in the south up to the area of Jerusalem, would have passed by a little Gentile city called Salem. It wasn't called Jerusalem yet and was very small. Salem was the urban seed that would later expand to become Jerusalem. But in Abraham's day, it was just a little town called Salem. Who was the king of Salem in Abraham's day? Melchizedek. And Salem is a Canaanite word at that time meaning peace. Not until 900 years after Abraham's time did King David conquer Salem, which by then had lengthened its name to Jerusalem. By then it was a Jebusite city. Doesn't mean it was Jebusite under Melchizedek's rule. It may have been something else. There may have been transfers of control. But in Abraham's day, this little town called Salem was the southern end of the region of Moriah, and he's heading up north. Now, Mount Moriah was the mountain directly north of Salem, the site where the temple would later be built. And on the west side of Mount Moriah was a gorge called the Tyropoeon Gorge. It used to be a couple of 100 feet deep, long since filled in with the rubble from successive destructions of the city of Jerusalem. You wouldn't even know there had been a gorge there today. And then west of that was a mesa, a plateau of high ground adjacent to Mount Moriah. So God said to Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. That's the area we're designating. Then God said, see if this is a quote or a misquote, sacrifice him there just anywhere you choose in that general area. No. This is interesting. God said, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. So it wasn't just what Abraham was to be willing to do that was important to God. What else was important to God? Where it was to be done. Have you ever wondered why it mattered? Why did there have to be a spot X, so to speak? Well, I think Genesis 22 gives us some clues. Because we learn in Genesis 22 that Abraham was accompanied by 2 servants and a donkey, and Isaac. All right? Genesis 22 tells us that the wood for the burnt offering had to be cut at a lower elevation. Apparently Abraham looked up, saw the place God was leading him to. Looked like there wouldn't be any firewood up there, so it had to be cut at a lower elevation. And how many pounds of firewood do you suppose it would take to reduce a human body to ashes? You probably have no idea, but I do. The Dani tribe in the mountains in New Guinea do not bury deceased loved ones in a grave. they cremate their bodies on a pile of firewood, and I have seen cremations. So I can tell you, it takes at least 90 pounds, what would that be, 40 kilos or so, of dry firewood to reduce even a relatively small human body to ashes. So it's a pretty heavy load. All right, how's it going to be transported from down here where it's been cut to up there where it's to be used for the sacrifice? If it was your choice to decide how it's going to be toted up there, what would your choice be? Laid it on on the donkey, or divide it 3 ways between the donkey and the 2 servants if necessary. Doesn't it seem logical to use the donkey? Failing that, the donkey and the 2 servants. But guess what? Genesis 22 verse 5 tells us, Abraham said to the 2 servants, stay here with the donkey. So who carried the firewood? Isaac did. Imagine him struggling uphill under a heavy load like that to the place that God had appointed. Now, it's on a mountain. Which mountain? There are only 2 mountains there, Mount Moriah and that high plateau adjacent to Mount Moriah. It said the region of Moriah, so that seems to indicate it wasn't actually Mount Moriah, which would mean what? The high ground on the west side of the Tyropoeon Gorge, adjacent to Mount Moriah. And that's where the major part of the old walled city of Jerusalem stands. And guess what's at the northern end of it? Gordon's Calvary. And that's far enough away from the site of the city of Salem that if Abraham, if he was making the altar and preparing to offer a human sacrifice within sight of Salem, no doubt during daylight hours, people of Salem would have been outside the city wall, tending their gardens, watching their herds, and a crowd would have gathered, transforming Abraham's test into a public spectacle. Have you ever pictured Abraham's test in the region of Moriah as a public spectacle? Well, it would have been if it had been toward the southern end of the region of Moriah, because Canaanites, whoever the people were, Jebusites, whatever, would have been there gathering around saying, oh, sir, we can't bear to watch such a lovely man. What kind of a God do you serve anyway? Maybe you're just having a midlife crisis. Maybe call a counselor to help you find a different solution to your severe emotional trauma. No. But if it was toward the northern end of the region of Moriah, that is at the northern end of the mountain adjacent to Mount Moriah, far enough away there would not have been a crowd. And Abraham didn't even want his 2 servants to be eyewitnesses of what was about to happen. What would be the point of leaving them behind if people from Salem were going to be there anyway? So these are indications that Abraham placed Isaac on that altar at the northern end of the mountain on the west side of Mount Moriah. In the region, yes, close by, but not actually on Mount Moriah. A foreshadowing of Jesus carrying a heavy load of wood in the shape of a Roman cross to that same place. And God provided a ram to take Isaac's place. And Abraham named that mountain, the Lord will provide. He apparently understood that the provision of the ram taking Isaac's place foreshadowed a much greater provision that God, the greater Father, would make for more than just one person on that same location. God wasn't just putting Abraham to a severe test. He was privileging Abraham to give mankind a foreshadowing of the kind of sacrifice that would later be made and even where it would be made. Only a God who's omnipresent, not only in space but in time as well, could have known exactly where that event would occur. So, imagine Jesus explaining things like this for his disciples, and no doubt moving on to passages like Psalm 16 verse 10, you will not abandon me to the grave, nor let your Holy One see decay. This was quoted just a few days later by Peter in his sermon on the day of Pentecost. Do you ever wonder why Peter quoted Psalm 16:10? Maybe it's because he read it in his devotions that morning and said, if I preach today, I'm going to quote this as a text. I think it's much more likely that Peter's quotation of Psalm 16 verse 10 on the day of Pentecost is an echo of Jesus having quoted it in connection with this mind-opening mega-theme a few days earlier. So, what else? Psalm 16:10 is where the psalmist wrote, "You will not abandon me to the grave, nor let your Holy One see decay," fulfilled by the resurrection of the Messiah. Psalm 22, verses 16 and 18, "They pierced my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." Isaiah 53, verses 5 and 6, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." These and other passages. Men and women, please picture yourself seated among the disciples during that mind-opening discourse. Look around at their faces. Do you see the expression in their faces changing? Do you see their eyes lighting up with new insight? And what is this mind-opening, what effect is it having upon them? It's causing them to say, it all makes sense. Of course, of course, of course. Why didn't we know this? Why didn't the rabbis teach us about these things? These passages have been there all along, and we never understood what this required of our Messiah. Now we do. Oh Lord, this makes such a great difference. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll never see the scriptures the same way again after this. But it's a lot of heavy mega teaching to absorb in one day. Couldn't we take the rest of the day off? Let's send someone out for a Pepsi and pizza and celebrate your resurrection, shall we? Hey, let's dance the hora here in the upper room, if indeed that's where they were. If they thought that was enough heavy teaching for one day, did Jesus agree or disagree? In effect, he said, no, no, no. I have opened your minds to understand one very important theme that's always been in the Old Testament scriptures that you didn't know about, the rabbis overlooked. I've shattered a major mental block that you inherited from the rabbis with this insight. But wait, there's another major mental block in your understanding of the scriptures, and I have to shatter it with another mind-opening discourse as well. So sit tight, men. I'm going to lead you through the scriptures again on another track. I'm going to connect another set of dots, as it were. And you're going to have your minds open to another theme that you have not perceived, but you're going to see it now. Mega theme B. Here is Luke's brief description of it. And I'm quoting here from Luke 24, verse 48. Jesus went on to say, "It is written, repentance and forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all the tribes of Israel, wherever they may be scattered." Is that a quote or a misquote? Now you think whenever I ask that question, the automatic proper answer is a misquote. Beware, I may reverse it sometime just to really see if you're really thinking. Yes, that it is a misquote. If he said, impacting all the tribes of Israel, would that have been opening their minds, or would that have been a review of rabbinic teaching? Just a review. The thing that was mind-opening for them was for Jesus to say, all nations. Beginning at Jerusalem, yes, but by no means ending there. So, Jesus is telling his disciples, Old Testament scripture is pervaded with a theme of an obligation for those who are Abraham's descendants to bless all peoples on earth, in the sense that some from every language, nation, people, and tribe must be blessed with a message of forgiveness and mercy, preaching repentance and forgiveness of sins to all nations. That is in the Old Testament. It's not only in the Old Testament, it's a major theme in the Old Testament. Do all seminaries teach that? Do you know there are some modern Bible teachers who say the Great Commission is not in the Old Testament. It is exclusively a New Testament thing. Isn't it too bad? They can't go back and counsel Jesus. If you're going to teach about missions, don't try to use Old Testament scripture because it isn't there. From their point of view, Jesus should have been standing among the disciples saying, I'm going to lead you out to the Mount of Olives and give you a command called the Great Commission. I really would love to give you an Old Testament foundation for understanding why it's necessary and how it can be carried out, but it isn't in the Old Testament, so I don't have a scriptural basis. I'm just going to have to do it without a scriptural basis. Matthew, you haven't written your gospel yet, so I can't quote from Matthew 28. Luke hasn't written Acts, so I can't quote from Acts 1:8. It wasn't that way. Do you see that Jesus did not miss the New Testament verses that are so commonly quoted to teach Christians that missions is an essential thing in God's plan? Jesus had all he needed in Old Testament scripture. He was right at home in Old Testament teaching missions. So, what are some of the dots he would have connected? Would he have had to start with the major prophets, or what? He went all the way back to Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3. And that's where God established his covenant with Abraham. And as you may have already heard me teach on videos or DVDs, God gave two main clauses of promises, the top line and the bottom line. I call the top line the part of the covenant which God said to the patriarch, I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Notice the recurring second person pronoun, you. It's a part of the covenant. God is promising to bless Abraham and his descendants, Abraham and the nation that would spring from him. Then God went on to add one more promise, the bottom line. Let's see if I quote it correctly. And all the other peoples of the earth will eat their hearts out with jealousy, Abraham, when they see how I exalt you and your descendants above them on a pedestal of privilege. Instead, God said, and all peoples on earth will be terror-stricken as you destroy their tall buildings with hijacked jets. All peoples on earth will be cowed into submission, overruled, dominated, abused, ripped off, oppressed, ignored. None of the above. What did God promise Abraham? He said, and all peoples on earth will be blessed by special angelic task forces that he would send down for the purpose. Correct me, please. To whom did God grant a franchise to bless all peoples on earth? To angelic task forces? Would they have been very willing to take the task on? Sure enough, God didn't give them the privilege. He said to Abraham, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And later we find God saying, through you and your offspring. In other words, through you and your descendancy, physical and or spiritual as it might be. So does that sound like the beginning of a mission of mercy? And is this unique? Some liberal theologians say nothing special about the Abrahamic covenant. Every ancient people saw themselves as favored by this or that god or group of gods for special privilege. It's just another line up in a covenant. It's like Abraham and his Hebrews saying, we got to keep up with the Egyptians, the Babylonian Joneses. We got to keep up with the Syrian and Assyrian whites and browns. We got a God and he's our covenant. So is it just a pale imitation of the other covenants that major peoples had? Or is it unique? To the best of your knowledge, did the gods of the Egyptians ever say to their worshippers in Egypt, we want to do something wonderful for Medes and Persians, Babylonians, Hebrews, and everybody else, and we require your cooperation, Egyptians. Help us bless all those foreigners. No. Those theologians overlook the fact that this bottom line covenant puts the Abrahamic covenant in a category by itself. This is the first expression of its kind in all of human history. Nobody else has ever recorded a God announcing a plan to bless a certain group of people in the midst of the human race in order to bless the rest of the human race through them. Here it is. Okay, we're going to take a break and see what else is significant about this 4,000-year-old promise. And during the break, you will find some resource materials on a table back there. The book Peace Child, is out in a new edition with a new last chapter, updating readers about things that have happened with those Sawi people since 1974 when the first edition came out.